today. Sister, we can fly.
People, its relationships with people. Because the United States also has a birth chart. For the liberation of Black and brown people. Relationships with people. Has to do with its people. If we look at this from an relationship with people, for the chart of June 19th, 1865, the sun and the planet Uranus. If we look at this from an agency,
Good evening, everyone.
June 19,
I'm Leo,
1865.
private market leader for Bank of America here in the Bay Area, as well as co-executive sponsor for the Northern California Black Professionals Group. Welcome and thank you for joining the Oakland Museum of California for its Sonic Freedom programs brought to you by Bank of America. I've been a big fan of the Oakland Museum as it was a memorable part of my childhood throughout various field trips and visits with family. Bank of America is a longtime partner of the museum because of our missions aligning. We believe in the power of the arts to help economies thrive, educate, and enrich societies, as well as create a greater cultural understanding. And that's why we're here to learn about the incredible work that is Afrofuturist artists. On behalf of Bank of America and the 5,000 teammates here in the Bay Area, we are thrilled you're joining us. Enjoy the program.
Okay, hi, welcome. Hello, everybody.
That is cool.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We're here at the Oakland Museum of California, live streaming from our new garden stage, and we have a small audience here of members. Welcome. Thank you for coming out today. Luckily, the weather held up. My name is Rhonda Pinazzi. I am the lead curator of the exhibition Mothership Voyage into Afrofuturism and the public programs manager for our Sonic Freedom series. Along with consulting curator Essence Hardin, we launched Mothership on August 6, 2021, and it will be on view until February 27, 2022. And as you know, as members, because of the storm we had a couple of weeks ago, our exhibition is unfortunately closed for a little while where none of the artwork was damaged, fortunately, and we're going to work towards getting it up and running very soon, and then it'll be open until February, so I hope you'll come back out to see it. The Sonic Freedom series is an extension of that show, so it came out of a lot of the collaborations and the content and the projects that we worked on with people on that show. And that's what we have here today. This is part 2 of the Sonic Freedom series. Last week we had Transformative Journeys and that live stream, and today we're going to have the second part of that live streaming called Afrofuturism and Sound. And we're going to start it off with a conversation between 3 brilliant thinkers and sound artists, sound technicians, and then we're going to go into a performance by Nicole Mitchell in her Black Earth Ensemble. So I'm going to go ahead and give an intro to our panel here. First we have Ellis Reid from Dolby Laboratories moderating the discussion. Ellis is the Senior Brand Marketing Manager of Content Creation and Delivery at Dolby. Ellis works closely with organizations, technology partners, creators, and engineers to help them better understand how to leverage Dolby's innovative imaging and audio technologies, Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, to deliver great experiences for users. Ellis collaborated with our guest musician, Nicole Mitchell, to develop the unique immersive surround sound experience in the entrance of Mothership. If you haven't been there yet, it's a beautiful experience. We hope you'll have a chance to get out there and check it out when the exhibition is back up and running. Next on the panel, we have Paul Miller, AKA DJ Spooky, AKA That Sublime Kid. Paul is a composer, multimedia artist, and writer whose work immerses audiences in a blend of genres, global culture, the environmental and social issues, and he has collaborated with an array of artists including Metallica, Chuck D, and Yoko Ono. His large-scale multimedia performance pieces include Rebirth of a Nation, Terra Nova, commissioned by the Brooklyn Museum of Music, Soul Counterpoint, written during his residency at Seoul Institute of Arts, Sonic Web, which premiered at San Francisco's Internet Archive in 2019, and Pioneers of African American Cinema, a collection of the earliest films made by African American directors released in 2012. Paul was the inaugural artist in resident at the Metropolitan Museum of Arts, the Met Reframed, in 2012. And just recently, Paul was appointed as the artist in residence at Yale University Quantum Institute. Paul's artwork has appeared in the Whitney Biennial, the Venice Biennial for Architecture, and many, many other museums and galleries. His books include the award-winning Rhythm Science, Sound Unbound, an anthology about digital music and media, The Book of Ice, a visual and acoustic portrait of Antarctic. His writing has been published in the Village Voice, The Source, and Art Forum. For Mothership, Paul curated a fantastic Afrofuturist playlist that you were listening to earlier today. It's available on Spotify, and it consists of over 165 songs. He also participated in a 2-day brainstorming workshop that helped to guide the project, usher into the content of the exhibition. And last but not least, we have the very talented Nicole Mitchell. Nicole is an award-winning, sorry, I'm having so much trouble with my clipboard. Give me a minute. Nicole is an award-winning flutist, composer, conceptualist, band leader, and educator. Her research centers on the powerful legacy of contemporary African American culture and Black experimental art. She is a recipient of the Women in Jazz Visionary Award, the Champion of New Music Award, the Doris Duke Award, the Herb Alpert Award, and the Top Jazz Flutist Awards from Jazz Journalists Association and Downbeat Magazine from 2010 to 2021, and many, many other awards. As a flutist, she has developed her own signature language. Much of her creative process has been informed by literature and narrative. With a special interest in science fiction, Nicole is also a professor of music at the University of Pittsburgh. Nicole has been commissioned by the French Ministry of Culture, the Museum of Contemporary Art of Chicago, the Newport Jazz Festival, the Art Institute of Chicago, the French-American Jazz Exchange, Chamber Music America, the Chicago Jazz Festival, and the International Contemporary Ensemble. For our show, she created the magical soundscape, Entrance of Mothership, her piece titled Mothership Calling, and it was developed in honor of science fiction author Octavia E. Butler. Nicole describes it as a calling to ancestral spirits, a sonic expression of gentleness, representing fragments of Black life and an effort to bring wonder to create a ritual healing dreamscape. Nicole's critically acclaimed Black Earth Ensemble has recorded over 10 albums and performed at festivals and art venues throughout Europe, Canada, and US. Following this inspiring conversation by our panel, we will enjoy a performance by the Black Earth Ensemble. And as I mentioned, we are stream-living here today, and we'll be on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Instagram Live. Please feel free to repost to your preferred social media. We'll have a brief Q&A after the panel. We'll be taking questions from the live stream audience, so if you want to go ahead and log on from the in-person audience and ask questions that way, that'd be great. So please join me in welcoming Ellis Reid, Nicole Mitchell, and Paul Miller in conversation.
All right, thank you, Rhonda. This is, I'm excited. And we're going to go through about 20 minutes of conversation, which, by the way, with these two, that's going to go super fast. And then we're going to take some questions. So later on, when you see me pull my cell phone out, I am not playing Candy Crush. I'm actually taking questions. So please, ask them as we go along. But, to start off with, I wanted, when I first got introduced to this, Afrofuturism, and does everyone even know what it is? So I started writing things about what it is, right? It's a lot of things, right? It's the past, present, future, reimagined through a Black cultural lens. And it's art, music, literature, cinema that expresses a just future where Black people and Black ideas thrive. It's all these things at once, and it's infinite in its expressions. We've only got 20 minutes, so you won't get infinity, but we'll get to do the best we can. But today we're going to focus on Afrofuturism and sound. And I'm really excited to be here with the two of these, really great creators, because they're multimedia creators. They work in a number of genres. They're continually challenging where things are, and hence embody the spirit of Afrofuturism as I understand it. So, and it's been my pleasure to meet them both. And in fact, this is this has been great that we came together, because this all started when I met Paul in New York, I guess now 3 years ago. Lost a year in the middle, but met Paul in New York 3 years ago. He did some things with us for us meaning Dolby for Afrotech, came out here for that. And then he got pulled into the museum and said, you guys should talk to the museum. And it turned out that Nicole was working on some ideas for immersive sound, and they thought that someone had told her Dolby would do that. So that chance, well, it worked, right? So that chance thing between Paul and I in New York and Soho, coming to Nicole, ended up with where we are here today. So I'm going to, so that's really how the story of all this came. And, I want to kind of sit back and kind of really talk through some things. I mean, Paul really works in a mashup of things. The number of things he's doing is a challenge, so you're going to hear that. And in fact, the thing that you really didn't come across is he's an artist in residence at Yale in their quantum physics area. So he's making quantum physics accessible. I really want to see how he does that. That's going to be an interesting one. And then at the same time, you've got Nicole, who, and by the way, she's got some Chicago roots like I do, and was, a leader in the Association for the Advancement of Creative Music, so continually pushing the boundaries of that. So with that, now we're going to move into, both of you work. It's music, right? You're creators. But honestly, when I look at it, science is a big part. Science and math end up being a big part of your, creative process, right? So, when you take a look at this, right, technology is that path to liberation. Technology is what drives Afrofuturism. And Nicole, when I first met you, in fact, you've talked about it, you started with an equation for your math, and not charts, but actually started with an equation. And then, Paul, when he talks about it, he says, his tools are information. So you're looking at two people who are really mashing up, science and music. And so with that, maybe I'll start with you, Nicole, talking a little bit about how you took that process and really started to bring the science and math into the creation process.
Thanks so much, Ellis and Paul. It's so great to be connecting with you all and everyone here. So that question that you had about the equation, the first thing I thought about was actually the idea of the sound being alive and wanting it to move through the space, and also it being non-durational, meaning that it had no beginning and no end, so like this idea of folding time. So that was actually the first concept that I had, and then it took the equations to figure out how to make it happen. So starting with the vision of this idea of colliding sonic events that are unpredictable and spontaneous and non-repetitive, and like having a certain number of those that come into the space, but then the energy of them and how they move and how they make your body respond. Like if something is over here and you look over here, but then you feel it behind you, and what does that make you feel like? So it's really holistic, where it's like what you feel, what you're curious about, and then a lot of times it's the technology that gets you to the vision to make it manifest. So that was the way that I worked on it, like what I wanted as the outcome, and then going back and figuring out like how can I make this happen, and that had to do with a lot of equations, and thinking of speaker designs and also collaborating with people that are better at some of this technology than I am. I collaborate with Tirith Mahunder, who's an amazing he's a PhD student right now, but he's a great artist, composer, and also a great coder in Max MSP. And so he helped me to really bring this to fruition. So I wanted to give thanks to him in this as well.
All right, so we're going to take the same question over here to Paul. Paul, you've wrote the internet as a musical piece. If you got to look at it, he actually has a piece, based on the internet. So, talk to me, how do you brought science and math into your musical art?
Okay, first and foremost, just to clarify, when he says music based on the internet, everybody has, at this point, the internet. It's just more like 2019 versus 1969. 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the internet. It started at UCLA, and the first hub was between UCLA and Stanford Research Institute. So I was commissioned to do a symphony celebrating that, and so that's when he says you have music on the internet. Just every musician at this point has music on the internet. It's just the idea.
Thank you.
Is I tracked down the gentleman who wrote the source equations for what you call packet switching that helps the internet route messages. So he is a wonderful gentleman who's at UCLA, who's still alive and kicking, Dr. Leonard Kleinrock. The filmmaker Werner Herzog hosted the concert at UCLA, and Werner was kind enough also to make a movie called Lo and Behold. That is, if you haven't seen it, it's a brilliant film about the origins of the internet, which is very California. And what's fascinating about it is that there's a tremendous series of accidents that make this idea of network communication happen. And when, Ellis, when you say technology, I always want to encourage people to have an expanded definition of technology. Language is a technology. The body, one could argue you communicate far more with body language than with words sometimes. And I'm a big fan of William S. Burroughs or science fiction writers like Samuel Delany, who've inspired my work as well. And we were just having a fun debate about what's wrong with the Apple Plus rendition of Foundation, Isaac Asimov's. So I've been very interested in these issues over the years. Like some of you may have seen Dune, and for example, they took out all the terms like jihad, which, by the way, in the actual book, Paul Atreides ends up leading a jihad based on the spice trade. If anybody hasn't read Dune, spoiler alert. So these kind of issues, being a composer who's really interested in collage, those are things that really make me very much concerned about when people are all saying that technology is the solution, because it's far more about every technology has an ideology behind it. Like, why do we use a keyboard in a certain way? Why do we use QWERTY, which is for your basic laptop or anything like that? Even I love to bring this up, but half of the sound of the 70s, which Nicole's wonderful music reminds me a lot of Herbie Hancock. One of the defining sounds of the 70s was Bob Moog's keyboards, which Funkadelic helped popularize. So whenever you hear any Funkadelic, you're actually hearing an open source initiative by this wonderful mathematician and keyboard maker. So Bernie Worrell, George Clinton, they would take these kinds of crazy, and so did Sun Ra as well. The Moog keyboard, Pink Floyd, etc. But then what would be the equivalent for us now? These are all things that just putting out there as in the air. So tech, otherwise you have Mark Zuckerberg running around saying he's meta. It's just, let's leave it at that.
Wow. Okay. Well, remind me not to say technology. But I will then kind of take it to you mentioned a lot of icons, right? And Mothership introduces, I shouldn't say introduces, but certainly celebrates some icons. And I know, Nicole, for you it was Octavia Butler, which I've since found out really goes back deep in yours. And then, Paul, for you, George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic. I'd like you guys maybe to talk a little bit about, how that inspiration drove your process.
You want to go first?
Sure. Octavia Butler, who's from she's originally from Southern California, grew up in Altadena, Pasadena, and I actually spent part of my life in Southern California. And my mother, we actually came post-integration to Anaheim, which at the time was not friendly for black folks. And so in that experience, I just remember watching my mother doing this automatic writing on her typewriter, writing these really amazing science fiction stories and painting, black women sitting on planets, like holding their babies and things like this. So the ideas of Afrofuturism I kind of just basically grew up into, and through her work and through her ideas and her creative manifestations of these ideas. But it wasn't anything going around us, anything like that. It just happened to be where she was coming from. But her being from Chicago, it was always fascinating to me that she was the same generation as the AACM cats that started the organization of the AACM. And so I felt some kind of connection between her and Sun Ra, for example, and yet she had never met these people. So I gravitated to them, as a young person, because I was looking to understand her better. She left my life very early, and so the fascination of her creativity, that began to become my own path. And so through Sun Ra, through her work, this idea of bridging the familiar with the unknown, really resonated with me, and it's really a part of everything that I do. And also the narratives, like the storytelling as a part of creating music and the experimentation. That's what I love about the AACM, is that it's a black organization that actually embraces experimentalism, which I think is a really amazing thing, because so many times we have to be so practical about just surviving and what needs to happen in order to move things forward. But that creativity really allows us to really imagine and then build what we need.
That's great. And Paul, if you can kind of take that same thing, and then I want you to sort of take over and ask a little bit about what you were talking earlier, because we got about 5 minutes. So,
Oh, wow.
So I told you it's going to go fast.
Yeah, this is fast. All right, so you guys are getting like the hyper text version of Cliff Notes version of something that's like smushed down into a very hyper condensed thing. All right, so a lot of my work comes out of both my parents are professors. I grew up in Washington, D.C. My dad was dean of Howard University's law school, and my mom was a historian of design. And we had a black middle class experience that was very stable and solid. And it was a pleasure to realize that that is something that we in America always assume, that there's this African American experience of devastation, trauma, and being, and damage. And what's fascinating to me is that when you think about the future versus, I always love to give people examples of history, because that's where we can draw inspiration to avoid the mistakes of the past. So, for example, if you look at the Civil War in the 1860s, who could have predicted that war? And then, a novel that was written right after that, Jules Verne, Going to the Moon in 1965, is the first science fiction novel to really put us on an interstellar kind of approach to things. And I love using that as an example, that this one book was written right after one of the most devastating wars. But then you have African-American science fiction writers like George Schuyler with Black Empire. I did an interview with Octavia Butler before she passed a while ago, and it was really intriguing to see. There's something about California. You guys have Philip K. Dick, if you haven't read any of his stuff, Blade Runner, for example, there's so many, Scanner Darkly. These are all inspirations for some of my thinking. But we're right now in a very, what feels like William S. Burroughs moment with like Trump, and they're trying to ban things like critical race theory, but if you were to actually stop someone and ask them what they think of it, they wouldn't even know. But there's people like Kimberly Crenshaw, who is one of the theoreticians who helped set up a legal framework for looking at the history of the legal mechanisms that go into these ideas of how race and law intersect. It's really wild, because we're not in the middle of a biological pandemic, we're in the middle of an ideological pandemic. And that's where Octavia Butler's work, like The Parable of the Sower or other kinds of things, viruses, genetic engineering, all sorts of, whether it's mRNA technology and vaccines. I'm like wondering, is there a vaccine for the Trump demographic? We need to. But yeah, these are all things that part of the basic 21st century vocabulary is that kind of strange intersection of biological processes, racial politics, and again, this is all now, and it's really the science. It feels like we've moved further into a science fictional moment, and that's what my music comes out of, that kind of uncertainty.
No, that's great. And what I'll do is, I think the one thing that we're about 3 minutes before we start getting questions. So I want to make sure that as people come, to go into the live stream and type questions. But I want to get one shot to go where you guys go, what is next, right? What's that future, right? Where are we going to go? Both of you are continually expanding how you do things. And Nicole, you said you don't do the same performance twice. So, where are we going to go? Where is this going to take us?
Okay, all right. I'm a big fan. There's a friend of mine named Stefan Alexander who has a great book called Fear of a Dark Universe that just came out, but his former book was called The Jazz of Physics. And me and him occasionally will talk about dark matter. I'm artist in residence at Yale, and the fun part about dealing with quantum physics and quantum mechanics is it doesn't really align with relativity. Like there's a gap between the macro level and the micro, going on down to nano and all sorts of smaller and smaller gradients. But dark matter is what they can't really quantify. It's pushing the edge of the universe. It's what makes galaxies swirl, in addition to black holes and other interstellar phenomena. But when you start thinking about our species is at this level where we're able to imagine that, you have to put the question to yourself, what can we not imagine? And that's where the 21st century, the sort of legacy of slavery and capitalism, and I've always felt that this century is like an evolutionary bottleneck. I mean, we're at the 6th great extinction. Many species are going extinct. The climate's in a slow motion collapse. And my motto these days is the planet will be here. We might not be. Like the extinction is a component of what makes the Earth go round at this point. But so when you say the future, it's either really bleak, which I'm sorry to go on a downer here, or it could be transcendent and all sorts of really amazing stuff coming out of the 21st century. But we need to get through this century because small groups of people can cause massive damage, as we've seen with people like whether it be Tucker Carlson, who's a psychological neutron bomb, or like Trump, who's like president as malware. It's kind of. But that's probably a different conversation. So that's the future. Bleak versus maybe transcendent. There we go.
Yeah, I would just add that's why I think it's so important as artists that we really focus our energies on helping encourage everyone, that our imaginations are power, and are we really using them? You know what I mean? Because we allow others to empower our imaginations to what they are seeing. When you look at all these science fiction movies and all these things like on Netflix, and how dystopic everything is in kind of parallel to what's actually happening. So now it's so hard to imagine something wonderful, to imagine a world that loves us, but maybe that's what we need to be doing. So that's what I've been thinking about as an artist, like how do you actually allow yourself to do that, and what does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that feel like? And that's, I have a book, my first book coming out soon called The Mandorla Letters, that explores that, and explores like diversity, coexistence, and non-hierarchical collaboration, and like this idea of redefining our identity as human beings, and taking all that hierarchical thinking out of it. So that's something that, to make art that way, something that I'm challenged with right now.
And Ellis, I want to. It's Afrofuturism here, so time is elastic. We're going to add a minute here.
They're giving me the eye. They're giving the eye from over there.
Right. We're going to stretch
the thumbs up.
We're going to stretch an extra minute out of this. But let's talk about sound systems for a second here, because
we didn't even get to talk about that.
The whole idea, whether it be the music that I put together for the exhibition or what she's doing, we're exploring different approaches to how people think of a conceptual frame for performance. And performance to me is not just music, it's about music as information. And when I hear Nicole's music, it's very evocative of a different era. And it's been really a pleasure. But also, when you're looking at the Dolby material and this immersive sound, that's something that comes out of so many layers of how African Americans have dealt with sound. I have a Jamaican connection, long story, but the sound system culture of the 70s in Jamaica was very different than African American. And it was when they combined in the South Bronx with people like DJ Kool Herc, whoever had more bass won. Like you'd have a sound battle. But now, if you fast forward to 2021, everyone in New York's walking around with headphones. No one's talking to each other. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the near future of sound, because you're at Dolby, and that's one of the top sound research centers in the country. I mean, and it's here, by the way, too. So,
well, I'll give a quick answer to that, because I am getting that look. Oh, no? Okay, she said no. All right, then I guess I'm going to go deeper. What we see is immersion, right? Giving the ability to put the listener in the middle of that, right? You're telling a story, right? It's storytelling through sound, through music, and giving the tools to actually be able to put your listeners in the middle of that, how you want them to feel it, and I say how they feel it, and how to actually do that. I mean, I've watched people, when properly immersed in the middle of it, like tear up. Literally going, wow, that's the emotion, and being able to express the emotion is what we're trying to get across. And the one thing I will say is I've been super glad this collaboration, because it's also about education, right? giving the tools to artists who then will be able to do the things, right? Dolby's not going to be doing that, but we can work with people like yourselves that can actually then start to tell your stories and to bring some feeling and deliver feeling. In fact, there was one question that came through here, and I'm supposed to be asking these, but there's one that I'm particularly going to ask is, it says, this is really for you, Nicole. You said, you believe music can be a vehicle for liberation, right? So what's the relationship between sonic expression and freedom, right? And I'm thinking, when I'm thinking emotion, that's certainly it. So maybe I'd actually like to hear both of you talk about that one.
That's a great question. Well, one of the things is that when we make sound, it's like another dimension that you can't touch, but it does exist. And in that dimension of sound, there's so many things that you have the freedom to do that you may not have in 3D reality. That's the way I've always felt a certain safety and freedom in creating music, because you can, we were talking about this earlier, that every song or every moment within a song can have a new paradigm, and then you can change it, and you can kind of push against the envelope with that. And so that sonic expression is a space for liberation, but it also, it can go the other way too. So it's definitely a powerful tool, and it can, it's something that can be abused as well as be healing, for us. So it's something definitely that I take, with a lot of respect. I respect the sound,
In terms of freedom and sound, I keep thinking about we're in this culture of debt. So, for example, right after the Civil War, they had this whole idea of 40 acres and a mule, and then they switched the goalposts a little bit, and everyone became sharecroppers. So if you updated your credit cards, like you're sharecropping, or for that matter, the average person is saddled with massive amounts of debt and so on. But freedom, from these kind of economic issues versus the implicit, or should I say complicit, relationship we have with this economic system. Maybe it's time to reimagine what is possible, and that's where my motto these days is that the imagination is the ultimate renewable resource, and we have a situation where we're in a culture of scarcity, where people are exhausting resources. There's huge forest fires, there's massive droughts, and it's going to get deeper and weirder. Meanwhile, people like Peter Thiel or the guys who own various massive corporations are all buying houses in New Zealand at this point or something. But there's only one planet, and I think that notion of freedom, implies deep responsibility and a relationship to the world that means humans are not the center of it. It's been amazing that the 18th, 19th, 20th century, the revolution of the mind, so to speak, that put human beings with our industrial revolution, political revolutions of democracy, all of those kept saying that the subject, the person, is at the center of things. And maybe it's time to rethink that. And that's maybe our notion of freedom comes out of this legacy of, there's a crisis of identity. And that's something I think is very 21st century. So,
all right, that was great. No, and
it's meta. It's not meta. Or maybe meta, not meta. That should be the new.
No, it's not meta. Not meta. It's real. So, in fact, a question came in, and I think this sort of follows there. Is right, a lot of ideas, right? You guys are really expressing a lot of ideas. Somebody asked, how do you take an idea and turn it into tangible sound, right? So those are, is this trial and error? This is something comes to you spontaneously. How do you, Paul, take a discussion with a scientist and turn it into a string quartet? So I'd like to hear from both of you as to how you actually, take those ideas and run with them.
Yeah, it's all about that dialectic. There's, if you go back to ancient Greece, you have Plato, you have Socrates, and there's these ideas that the West has had as a legacy of a good conversation. Meanwhile, in West Africa, with polyrhythm, with polytonality, all of these things that linger over the American toxic cocktail we call reality here. I love the fact that a good conversation can lead you along all sorts of different flights of imagination. And yeah, I've worked with many scientists over the years. For example, I'll just do this very quickly because I know we're on a time thing. One of my favorite projects is I went to Antarctica for 6 weeks with a backpack and did a series of what I call Acoustic Portraits of Ice. Now, ice in Black culture, you have Ice Cube, iced tea. If you got the white guy, you got Vanilla Ice. There's always that kind of ice as cold. But of course, Miles Davis was Culture of the Cool, things like that. But what would happen if you remix that idea? So I wanted to go to this remote area. It was several areas of Antarctica. But I worked with Brian Greene, who's a legendary physicist, and he wrote this book, The Elegant Universe. It's about mathematics throughout the space-time continuum. I mean, he gets pretty technical. But being able to kind of sit across from someone and say, okay, that's your thought process, let me figure, and then come back with some music, and then come back with a couple other rough drafts, other ideas. There's not one set approach, and this is also coming out of DJ culture, which is remix. There is not one style. Like, there's many styles, and that's it's the unfinished work. Like, you're always kind of adding and changing.
All right. Well, the same.
I don't remember the question now.
It does happen when you hear him talking. He's he's always
I'm hypnotized.
No, so this is the question. Really, is where do your ideas come from? You're creating something new every time. The idea is coming from somewhere. What's generating that for you?
I don't know. That's a very difficult question to answer. I think what happens is I definitely have a time where I'm going into what I call the maroon cloud or the mind lake, which is where I kind of view collective consciousness. And I sit in there and it's like I'm seeking, there's something that's bothering me that I'm trying to solve. And then within that, I try to name what those things are. And then when it's, I start coming up with words and colors and emotions. And from there, and sometimes there are concepts, like with Mandorla Awakening, when I did that project, I was asking the question, what is progress? And that was really bothering me because I felt that technology was our definition of progress, but technology is a tool for progress. And that actually, when you look at human interaction with the planet and with each other, we're not doing anything any better than thousands of years ago, even though technology is advancing. So how do we do that? And then how would I address that in music? How would I answer the question, what is a technologically advanced society that's egalitarian and in tune with nature look or sound like? And then I have to figure out how to make that into sound. You know what I mean? And so I'll start with those ideas because they're bothering me usually. And then from there, I'll figure out, like with that project specifically, I wanted to have this idea, like I said, of diversity coexisting, to have these multiplicity of musical languages where each person was an avatar of a certain language, and have them to coexist authentically without it me being overly controlling as a composer. So how do I write for something like that with people who don't necessarily read music? And then on the other side, you have another person who's like a classically trained musician, and make a piece where all of that works together. So I guess that's a little peek into my process.
No, that's great. I like the maroon clouds, because it really, we are trying to tap into the collective consciousness, and I'm just being told I'm going to wrap it up. So, but and I'm only saying that because it started with Afrofuturism is infinite. Our time here is not. So
well, actually, Einstein would say it's all simultaneous. We're all, I love it. I mean, by the way, I want the audience to feel like this is the beginning of a conversation with the museum, and regretfully the exhibition, because of the rain.
Right.
If you can, please check out the website. There's all sorts of material on the website too. So,
All right, well, let's wrap up because I think we do wrap up because we do want to have more time for, Nicole Mitchell's Black Earth Ensemble, which is, I guess you've been working with this group collection for 20 plus years?
Yes, and it's different every time.
All right. So on that note, thank you both. It's and I love, I'm so glad I ran into you in New York 3 years ago and introduced me to Nicole. So it's all together. So the collective consciousness is bringing things together. So on that note, thank you very much.
All right.
Within the United States birth chart, the United States that has to do with its people, other people, its relationships with people. Because the United States also has a birth chart. For the liberation of Black and brown people. Relationships with people. If we look at this from an astral for the chart of June 19th, 1865, the sun and the planet Uranus.
Hey, that was an amazing conversation. It was such a privilege to witness that, and I just want to go ahead and welcome Nicole Mitchell and the Black Earth Ensemble.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Nicole Mitchell. This is Black Earth Ensemble. I want to invite you to get to know these wonderful people on the stage here. That's Alexis Lombre on the keyboards. What is this instrument over here? It's a diddly bow being performed by Coco Ulysses. And on a very unique percussive setup of cajon and cymbals, we have Jovia Armstrong. Just came back from the ACM's 55th anniversary concert a few days ago, and we're happy to be here in sunny California playing some new compositions for you tonight.
Dream swimmer, dream swimmer. Dream swimmer, dream swimmer. In the midnight, we meet down at the river, trading bits of stories we weave in each other. Dream swimmer, dream swimmer. dimensions, out of our disparity, taking utopic vision to a stretch it out, stretch it
how it was born. We talked about that dope erotic twang. It was so black and so country. She picked their nerves like buttons popping off a sequenced coat. That made it even more all of that. It was a hollering that made you do something new. She sang, she screamed, and then she whooped your behind. We build foundations from our hips. Her heavy vibrato, her soulful melancholy reaches for the heavens. She told the trombones to dip and stretch their tones. It was that made them trumpets wail and whine through the brim of their hat. At that point, all the saxophones could do was dance so deep that they could wail white again. Yes, ma'am. Her hands raised high, calling Holy Ghost that brought jazz here, and that's just what it was, and that's just how we be. country. She picked their nerves like buttons popping off a sequence coat that made it even more all of that. It was a hollering that made you have to do something new. She sang, she screams, and she whips your behind. We build a foundation from our hips. Yes, her heavy vibrato, her soulful melancholy reaches for the heavens. She told the trombones to dip and stretch their tones. It was her that had trumpets wail and whine through the brim of their hats. And at that point, all the saxophones could do was dance so deep they could wail white again. Yes, ma'am, with her hands raised high, calling Holy Ghost. That's what brought jazz here. And just how that was, that's just how we be.
That's how we be. That's how we be. That's how we be. That's how we be.
Alexis Lumbre, Dovia Armstrong, Coco Ulysses, I'm Nicole Mitchell. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the Oakland Museum. Please come check out the exhibit. The Afrofuturist exhibit will be here until February. And take us away, Rhonda.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. I could listen to you guys all night. I loved it. Thank you, everybody, for coming out and for watching online. And yes, please come out and see Mothership Voyage into Afrofuturism on view until February. And yeah, thanks to Paul and Ellis over there enjoying themselves. And this was a beautiful evening. I really appreciate y'all coming out. Have a good night.
United States birth chart. The United States that has to do with its people, other people, its relationships with people. Because the United States also has a birth chart.